Hi, this is Varvara from Second Wind EB-5, and in this short video, we're going to talk about vertically integrated regional centers. Jordan Lawrence, who is operational director of the regional center based in Houston, Texas, will help me to cover this topic. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So if we talk about the vertically integrated regional centers, it's a type or subcategory of the regional centers. And therefore, before we dive into this topic, Jordan, how would you define the regional center in general? What's the regional center? What's its role in the EB-5 process?
So, a regional center is a licensed entity by the USCIS to raise and pool EB-5 capital as part of the EB-5 program to then either lend or invest into typically real estate developments, but can also be operational businesses as well. So, typically, regional centers, you could view them or think of them as mezzanine lenders.
That was short and sweet explanation. Now let's move to the vertically integrated regional centers. What are the main characteristics of this type of regional centers?
Yeah, a vertically integrated regional center and developer is when the regional center is owned by the same principal as the developing arm. Another way of thinking about it is the regional center and developer are one and the same. They're either partners in the projects, they're a subsidiary of one another, but essentially at the end of the day, they are these owners of the project together. And the benefit that as Houston EB-5 and vertically integrated regional center developers, that route, the benefit that we provide is having much lower cost of capital to the projects and cutting out a middleman, so to speak, that third party mezzanine regional centers are. So the projects have more room for dealing with whatever unprecedented economic times happen, such as COVID, the 07-09 housing bubble crisis. You never really know what's going to happen in real estate developments. So you try to plan for the worst and mitigate risk. And that's really what our competitive advantage is as a vertically integrated developer and RC is we're lowering the project's overall cost by cutting out the middleman and not earning interest off of fundraising.
I'm talking about the interests. My guess, and that's actually what you confirmed as well, that in your projects, investors may expect to receive higher interest payments on their funds. Is it right?
Yeah, of course, because again, third-party regional centers, they'll pay an investor a very small return, but then they'll loan that pooled EB-5 capital at higher rates, and they're keeping that delta, the spread between the interest rate they're paying the investor and charging it to the project at. Vertically integrated regional centers and developers cut out that middleman and have lower cost of capital to the projects, but also because we're not keeping that spread for ourselves, we can pay our investors higher returns. A common misconception or myth that some people like to mislead EB-5 investors with is go with a project that has a smaller return because lower return means lower risk. And to a naive financier, as someone who doesn't really understand real estate investments or developments, that might make sense because higher returns come with higher degrees of risk. But what they're misleading about and not being completely honest is with regards to they could pay higher returns to the investors if they weren't keeping so much for themselves. So when you cut out that middleman by the vertically integrated model, you are able to pay investors higher returns and have lower cost of capital to the project. So it's a win-win situation.
If we talk about the projects you work with, how big is the EB-5 investment in these projects normally? Like what the percentage of capital stack would be EB-5 funds?
With our projects, you're typically seeing 35 to 40% of the capital stack consisting of EB-5 funds. Then as a developer, we're typically bringing 10% as well, and getting a senior lender of 50 to 55%. So EB-5 and across the industry, you see similar capital stacks. Sometimes you see much larger EB-5 raises and less developer equity. Sometimes there is no senior, and it's just all EB-5. So you can really structure projects however are best for that opportunity if there are enough jobs to be created.
And one of the concerns of investors when they're looking at the different options, that in vertically integrated regional centers, there is no oversight of the developer activities, and it's hard to understand if the regional center would be so dedicated to make sure that all things done as it was planned, as in the standard approach when the regional center is third-party entity.
Yeah, another great point, and I often discuss this with EB-5 prospects. And again, it's due to what we say is really just smoke and mirrors in EB-5. It's a way of marketing things. Now, a lot of third-party regional centers will express what you just said. Don't go with a vertically integrated regional center and developer, because who's looking out after your funds? Who's going to enforce those rights? And while this used to be the pre-RIA, so the Reform and Integrity Act passed in March 2022, this used to be what regional centers would claim was their greatest value or contribution to the program. They were a fund administrator. They were oversight, separating developer from the fundraiser. But post RIA, all projects are required to have third-party fund administrators separate from the regional center, separate from the developer. It shows you how much the USCIS trusted regional centers because they included this measure. So what value do regional centers really claim to provide now? There really isn't any value besides being a glorified license holder. So that's why we think the real value lies with vertically integrated developers and RCs, because we're not profiting from fundraising, but rather on the back end of projects and have lower cost of capital. But getting back to your point, okay, well, if a third-party regional centers project were to default, is that regional center really in a position to take over the project from the developer? Are they an experienced developer? Are they motivated to do that? Are they financially incentivized to take over the project from a developer? And what you often find is, no, they're not, because they're going to continue earning interest on that EB-5 debt. And they probably prefer not to take over the project from the developer, have to start spending their own equity and be invested in the project. They'd rather just sit back and continue earning interest, and hopefully the project turns around 3-5 years thereafter. So unless there's an intercreditor agreement, and unless that regional center is prepared to act as a developer and has had successful developments in the past, they're likely not going to enforce any action on the developer anyways. And since they aren't providing any real value in the process, does that warrant an added cost on the EB-5 fundraising due to their interest that they retain? No. And so that's why it's for us a no-brainer to have the vertically integrated developer and regional center model, because there really is no value regional centers provide. So you might as well have lower cost of capital to the projects, pay the investors higher returns, and have a better outcome for all in the process. So that's what I would say to your question about distinction between the developer and the RC, and why some people like to think that's the most important thing, but how it's really not even a practical consideration.
But in any case, our recommendation is always to make sure you do check the track records of previous projects for regional center, vertically integrated or not, because it does give you idea on how well the regional center worked in the past, what happened with their previous projects. Now, luckily for the investors who are getting into EB-5 in these days, there is a number of regional centers who can prove their previous track records. And Jordan, your regional center is one of them. So based on your previous records, you can show that you already done a good job in the past, and most likely will continue to do it in the future.
Yes, ma'am. We sure as hope to, and are very careful with the projects that we undertake because we're investing our own equity, and it's a lot more than the single EB-5 investor in a project. So we have to be very careful with where we spend funds and the opportunities we take on. So we hope to continue that success as well.
And if we talk about the projects your developer taking in, are all projects have EB-5 component in it, or just some of them?
Not all of them. We've had, one-off projects that have not had any EB-5 capital. Funny enough, it had some of our former EB-5 investors in there because when we returned their capital, we had other investment opportunities and they wanted to continue earning good returns and trusted us. So we've had opportunities like that. I would say out of every 10 projects that we're doing, 8 to 9 are EB-5 related, and 1 to 2 have no EB-5 funds involved in them.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for the detailed explanation and covering the main characteristics of vertically integrated regional center.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the useful and informative questions.
Thank you so much. And guys, if you like this video and want to learn more about the EB-5, please check our previous videos, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you.